You are listening to Accents, a radio show for literature, art, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoikova, and my guest today is poet and scholar H.L. Hicks. Hi, Harvey, how are you?
Hi, Katerina. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm nice. Thank you.
I recently interviewed Harvey for his latest collection, The Gospel According to H.L. Hicks. And we had such a good conversation. I've looked up a few other books by him. And there is one in particular that really caught my attention to the point of inviting him back for another interview. And this book, I feel, is pretty remarkable. It's a poetry book, but it also resembles a scholarly work. It is innovative and exhaustive at the same time. It's fresh and terrifying. Furthermore, I find it prophetic, and we'll talk about all that. But please, could you first introduce us to this book?
Yes, thank you. The book is called American Anger, and it's a poetry collection, although I intentionally have given it a subtitle, an evidentiary, trying to identify it from the beginning of a prospective reader looking at it, to try to identify it as a work that has relation to a normal poetry collection, the way that a documentary film has a relation to normal narrative film. That the intention of this work is to identify and describe a phenomenon that seems to me to be very active and present in our lives and in our society. And so that's the impulse behind it, and the reason for having that subtitle and evidentiary. Yeah. Katerina, you're muted.
Thank you. Well, the title is American Anger. How is American anger different or similar to or specific to this book and in general?
Right. At least one way it's specific to this book is simply that, I myself am a U.S. citizen, born in the U.S., have lived in the U.S. all my life. And so my own experience base is here. So because I'm located here, the book is located here and focused on that. But that's sort of one account. Another account is, the United States is in a particular sort of position in relation to the rest of the world, especially it's especially central or powerful in relation to things like what is happening across the globe militarily, economically, and so on. And so because the US is, has influence that goes beyond US borders, it seems to me that there's a particular interest in trying to understand phenomena that happen in the US, because they influence other people, for better or for worse. Maybe there are many fabulous things that benefit other people outside the US, but certainly there are many things that are problematic for others outside the US.
And whose anger are we discussing in this book? Whose anger will we read about?
Yeah. The anger of a lot of individuals, but also a kind of collective anger, and anger that shows up in ways that one might not be able to point to an individual as the source of it. And so in the ways that many of our experiences, for instance, of frustration, are there's no one exactly to point to. If I
Oh, that's tough.
Right. And so I'm interested in what's the relationship between the emotion and activity that we would, when we see it in an individual, we call it anger. Oh, that person is angry. That action was an expression of anger. So when it specifically is located in or performed by an individual, we call it anger. But I'm interested in also the very large scale phenomena that either have real resemblances to this individual anger. So physical harm to others. If I ball up my fist and hit someone, we would very likely impute that to anger. And so if a nation enacts violence against another nation, what do we call that? What do we attribute it to? And so on. It seems to bear analogy to these individual actions. And so I'm trying to think through these poems, and in this book, I'm trying to think about that relationship between those things and ways in which even individual angers, instead of assuming that large scale things that we might well call anger, large scale acts of aggression, instead of assuming that they're somehow accumulated individual anger. So because lots of individual Americans are angry, America collectively does something. There might be a kind of reverse sense of that, in which structural violence imbues individuals with anger. So an individual
So anger
might...
goes both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I want to know, how was this book conceived? I mean, when did you know you were writing about anger? And then like, wow, I really have body of work here. I better write some more, right?
Right. Yeah, it started with what became the first sequence in the book that includes a lot of each section in that sequence, each individual poem has within itself sort of fragmentary sections. And so those began as just things I was seeing around me. I just began to be aware of things like, one of the very early experiences it got shaped a little bit for the poem, but I just started noticing in the parking lot at the grocery store, the number of bumper stickers that were aggressive bumper stickers, in which the bumper sticker was bullying, was expressing anger, was accusing someone or a group of people, and so I just starting to notice the number and variety of bumper stickers in the parking lot. and so, of course I keep notes of
basically the writing started with other writing, as in
it did. Yes.
historically poetry does.
Right. Yes, I love the Harold Bloom said in a book one time, the meaning of a poem can only be another poem.
Yeah.
And so I do love the way that words generate other words. Words invite other words. They invite us to think about them. And yeah. So it was phenomena like those bumper stickers and just incidents. And so as I began to try to sort of work these out and record these, then it started to occur to me, oh, okay, I'm observing a theme here. Yeah.
And how long did you write and write and write on the theme?
I guess I'm trying to think if I even know exactly. The recording took place for a long time. The actual trying to make those notes into a series of poems, from that until the time of the completion of the book was probably 2 years.
And did you stop after you finished this book writing about anger, or did it sneak back, and does it does it still sneak into your work nowadays?
It does. I think it's coming in other ways. I'm interested in trying to sort out these days the acts very specifically not of anger per se, but of violence, and the sort of range of violence that we perform. I'm interested in the phenomenon. I'm interested in this basic dislocation that I think shows up in our lives in a lot of ways, and it's very, very problematic. It seems to me to be problematic in a lot of ways. Dislocation between will or intention, perceived worth of an action, and actual effects on other people. And so for example, just read a fabulous, amazing book by a scholar, philosopher, Kate Manne, Manne, called Down Girl. And she's just giving a philosophical view of what she calls the logic of misogyny. And one of the main points in the book is
I love the sound of the logic of misogyny. It just rolls off your tongue. It's so poetic.
Yeah. And this book is very powerful. And a part of what she identifies is that persons performing misogynistic actions very often understand it as righteous, sanctified. in their moral framework, it's obligatory and valuable. And so I'm interested in that, because that same distinction seems to me to show up in so many ways. You know, why is there a distinction? Why is there a problematic relationship between, for example, white liberals and Black Lives Matter movement? At least one participating reason is this exact same thing. A white liberal, a part of what's being expressed there is, but I intend to be, you know, I intend equality, I intend justice, and so on. So there's a kind of, I understand myself. My moral framework says I'm doing what I should be doing. I'm trying, and yet the effects are not on other people with other perspectives. The effects are not identical to that, and the same thing with, you know, what would a pro-Trump person breaking into the Capitol say? I'm righteously, you know, I'm helping make America great again. So to that person with that person's moral framework, the activity is one of righteousness. It's not, the person is not intentionally doing something that they understand as bad and evil and harmful to others. They think they're doing the right thing. They think they're doing something heroic. And so that I'm interested in how that discrepancy plays out. So that the person performing the action feels justified in the violence that they're enacting on other people. They feel justified in, you know, destroying the institutions of democracy because they understand things in a different way. So that contrast between intention and, within one's own moral framework, goodwill, and a harm at potentially very large scale, severe harm to other people. And it just seems to me to happen over and over and over again in our society. So this Kate Mann book happens to point it out in relationship to misogyny. But it seems to me to show up in all kinds of places. And so that's one thing that I'm trying to think about now and sort out for myself and figure out, because it raises a perplexity for us. If other people, if that's happening with other people, you know, the person breaking into the Capitol thinks they're doing the right thing. What makes me think that I'm, you know, not guilty of the same thing? Of course, I think I'm doing the right thing. What makes me exempt from the terrible, awful flaw that person has succumbed to? Why am I exempt from that? So it seems like a real problem to me.
Everybody thinks they're on the right side and everybody's angry.
Right.
I want to read a quote from the back of the book. It's W.S. Merwin quote. I don't think we can get rid of violence. Anger is in all of us, and greed is in all of us. We can't get rid of it in ourselves. We can't get rid of it in the society, but we can oppose the organization of it. The use of it is a tool and is a threat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Doesn't that sound prophetic? To me, that sounds prophetic. The book came out in 2016, which makes me think that you wrote it, well, you said about 2 years, and then maybe 1 year to publish it. So maybe you finished this book like 2015.
Right.
And here we are, 2011, and what does the book feature? The book featured
Right.
the snake there, and it says
Right.
American Anger. And it feels like we're at the same place. And we have here the coiling upward snake. It's like all this circle, we're circling, and we're encountering the same issue.
Right. Right. Yes, I do believe that it is the same issue. I believe that I think that W.S. Merwin got it right in the passage that you're quoting, that there is something in us that we can't get rid of this basic impulse. What we can do is recognize it more clearly, deal with it differently than we have been dealing with it. And so, I think he's right about this, opposing the organization of it. How is it functioning? Is it spiraling out of control? Is it multiplying? Is it feeding on itself, or are we organizing it as a dynamic tension that can be we can use it in some way constructively rather than we see this. It's easier to think about at the scale of an individual. And so we can think about, I've got a lot of pent up anger from my childhood. And so when I go to my therapist what's my therapist going to do? Help me focus that anger, use that anger as an energy source toward constructive aims, rather than as a self-destructive force, sort of turning it against myself or against others in harmful, destructive ways. How can I channel that energy? So we have ways of thinking about it as individuals, but it's harder to think about it as all of humanity or as a very large scale entity like a nation. It's much harder to think about this force we could call anger, and how does it get directed at a positive aim rather than a self-destructive aim or a destructive to others aim.
I have more questions, but before that, I would love for you to read us a little bit from the book.
Sure, thank you. Yes, so maybe actually, since I mentioned the bumper stickers that started it, let me find the poem. Yeah, so if I encounter this, the book does have quite a few instances of swear words in it. So they're not gratuitous. They're present because, of course, swear words are often used in contexts contexts of which anger, and so they're often quotes here. But if I encounter them as I'm reading along, then I'll skip them or something. So this is a poem called Aggression Q11. So the first sequence is, aggression Q1, aggression Q2, and so on. So aggression Q11, the stationing of troops. Bought this heap of crap for the bumper stickers. Saw it in the lot at Safeway. Sweet Aussie, pretty markings in the rusted out bed, intent on the store's automatic doors. Truck means nothing to me, but listen to this. Screw Jane Fonda. What has war ever done? And Nazism, communism, and slavery. When in doubt, empty the magazine. A dead enemy is a peaceful enemy. If you can read, thank a teacher. If you can read English, thank a soldier. Gun control equals hitting your target. In the ass-kicking business, business is good. Penny nice and pound fuming, put your best fist forward. That's not going to help. But who are the militia? All the male inhabitants, 16 to 60, all the knowledge and strength of the nation. That's an angry man walking his Rottweiler off leash. That's an angry hummingbird buzzing my head over and over. They sure are some angry raccoons this town's got. Those are some angry sparrows. For a while you take orders, but then you throw a punch. Today we read from the cultural script called Honor. Against any threat, I'd risk my life to defend yours, but insult my mother and I'll kill you without remorse. Only my readiness for both validates your trust. Count on me no matter what, but don't tick me off. As when one prisoner, perceiving aggression from another, behaves aggressively in return.
Can you speak about the speaker in these poems?
Yeah, the speaker in this sequence is maybe speakers, plural, and so the speaker is certainly not me, although somehow or other all the experiences are connected to me, either through, for instance, the list of bumper stickers at the beginning of the poem, they weren't actually all on one truck. And so this is a fictional speaker saying, I bought this truck because it had all these bumper stickers on it. But it means that the speaker is a kind of composite of all these, it was a number of individuals who had these various bumper stickers on their cars. And so a kind of composite of those individuals becomes the speaker of that first section of this poem. So it means that it's a kind of a voice of a single voice made up of several voices, in the way that it happens that for one of my classes this semester, I'm rereading Richard Wright's novel Native Son, and the edition that I have has an essay that he wrote about the protagonist of that novel, Bigger Thomas, and how he constructed this character, Bigger Thomas. And he says essentially the same thing. He says, I knew when I was a kid, I knew a bunch of Bigger Thomases, and he describes Bigger Thomas 1 and Bigger Thomas 2 and Bigger Thomas 3, and he put them all together and it became that. So it's the same thing here with the first voice in this poem.
Well, I want to ask about the series, and and they seem exhaustive. You said aggression Q1, aggression Q4, etc., and then we have compromised sonnet, this and that, and like a group of them. So how do you write in series? I know how I write in series. I know what I teach people, when I think it's super important to write in series when you write books. To me, that's the easiest way to gather material. How do you do it? How did you do it?
Right. Yeah, it can sometimes happen for me in different ways. And so for example, the sequence in here that is translations of passages taken out of the ancient Greek tragedies, that sequence was kind of decided on and planned before it actually started happening. So that happened after the book had begun to coalesce, and after I knew that it was going to be a series of series, then it occurred to me, oh yes, here's an amazing source of articulations of anger that is both individual and collective, that's a long ago, far away, but also a very strong correlative. So
Yeah.
that series happened because I thought, oh, this needs to happen. The first series, the one that we just read from, Aggression Cues, happened differently. It was from that kind of just gathering stuff until it became clear that, oh, I see. So something wants to become not just random notes, but it wants to become a poem. It wants to become organized. So those two came from sort of different directions, but at some point you begin to see, oh yes, this is, in order for me to make the connections that are to be made, there has to be a series. There has to be more than one poem involved. So that it does maybe happens variously, but I share your impulse that there's something about a series that's very powerful.
I think, we write series of poems about something because we, in a way, are to a smaller or larger degree obsessed with the topic. And in my personal experience, unless I write all the poems, I have not understood why I am obsessed with the topic. And I need to discover that, because that's the kind of person I am. I want to understand. But in this book, you not only write, not the poems, they make each other stronger, not only within the series, but also across the series. I really admire what you've been able to do. And I want you also to say a few things about another series, which is not together. I guess there are two other series that are not together. The one is about the intentional pages, the pages intentionally left, and then about your biographies, the series of author bios, H.L. Hicks, this and that.
Right. Yeah, both of those, as you would probably guess, both of those came very late in the construction of the book. And so I, at one point, I don't remember now where it was, that as as I was trying to find a shape for the whole thing. At some point in a random document, I came across one of those pages that you often see in, formal insurance policy or a contract or whatever, where it's a blank page and there in little brackets is this page intentionally left blank. And so I just happened on one of those documents as I was trying to construct this book. And it was one of those moments, well, of course. And so then
It was
it
a stroke of genius. Yeah.
It was very exciting because it was one of those moments where, oh yes, then it becomes, what are all those words that you substitute for blank? This page intentionally left, furious, this page intentionally left, and so on. What are the right words that do suggest this ominous presence of something that's hard to pinpoint and hard to control, but strongly influences us? What is that one word I can substitute in that will twist this familiar formulation into something more haunting? So that did happen late in the.
And how can you give the reader a break between sections and at the same time not give them a break?
Right, exactly. And I hope that both of these sequences, this page intentionally left sequence and the autobiography sequences, I hope that both of them have that kind of duality that we experience so often in life of, I hope they're funny, but also just deadly serious.
Yeah.
I hope that they convey how pervasive the presence of this anger is.
They're
how
complex. Yeah. If I have to point to one word, I would say they're complex. I mean, the whole book is complex and the issue is complex and large and it reflects it. But speak more about your bios there. I think that was brilliant. At first I found it a little bit, disorienting, like, what? The book is over? What? No. Tell us what you did. Tell us what you did.
Yeah, there's of course, as we all know, we're all familiar with that custom of having about the author at the end of a book. So a little note, what the author of this book wrote before, what the author does for a living, where they live, that kind of thing. So we're accustomed to, about the author, so and so lives in such and such place. But of course it occurred to me that, well, but if I'm writing about these the ways that these manifestations of anger influence all of us and shape our lives, then whatever ways in which they are a part of me and a part of my life. And so then just things that are quirks of the university at which I'm employed, or the town or the state in which I live, that seem like curiosities, but that also seem to me to carry weight, to mean something, to embody this kind of anger. Then those got noted rather than the usual, H.L. Hicks works at such and such place.
The book is long, and for a poetry book, it's pretty exceptionally long. So I guess I have questions around that, because you could have actually made 3 full-length books out of this material. And was it difficult to find a publisher? I know that if somebody comes with such long poetry book, I would have to think longer about that one, Right. So tell us about that.
Yeah. I've had the great good fortune of having a sort of long-standing relationship with Etruscan press, and its founder and editor, Phil Brady, himself a marvelous poet and writer. And so Phil was, our relationship by the time of American Anger had been long-standing enough, numerous books by then, that, you know, he was going to indulge in reading whatever I sent him. You know, he might not publish it, but he would read whatever I sent him. And so I didn't have to worry about whether I could get a reading for the book, because I knew he's at least going to read it. And a part of the shape of the book actually came from his editorial input. So the sort of lightly faded writing that goes behind the other writing was a section of the book on its own that Phil just essentially vetoed. You know, said it's too much, it's too directly historical. So it was, that section included a lot of found documents about historical incidents of American US you know, acts of violence against groups and so on. So it includes documents about the Salem witch trials, and documents about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, and so on. So it's a lot of just like found material accumulated. And so Phil just said it's too it's too you know, too much of a slog to make it through. And so what ended up happening with that material, which I wanted it to be there as a, you know, I'm not fantasizing this. This is not a, I don't want the document to be an expression of my political views. I want the document to be an archive of a phenomenon that you know, readers will take in their own way and do with what they will. And so this body of material, I wanted it as the kind of counterweight that says, look, this is not just an expression of Harvey's personal opinions. This is not Harvey's 200-page bumper sticker.
But I want to read Harvey's take on this. You know, ultimately, that is the honest truth. I want to see what Harvey wrote about anger, and I want to see how he filtered everything through his bio even. So it's wonderful to add the energy of those historical documents, but ultimately this is your book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of what Phil insisted on, was, you know, so they became submerged, and they're present if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
you could go through and read them, but they're in very light grayscale, so they're hardly visible. They're in
like ghosts.
Yeah, ghosts. And so they're not
they're the ghosts of violence past.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I would love for you to read several poems. to give us a little bit of a reading from the poem, whatever you feel is relevant to today, or
Yeah. Let's see. How about this poem? So here's a poem that's this is just a list. So this poem, it seems to me, relates to what we were just saying. On the one hand, this poem it's simply a list. So in one way, this is just stuff out there in the world I have nothing to do with. There it is. So it's evidence in that way. And yet, of course, the list came because I went out and compiled it and arranged it into this list. So in that way, it's both a found poem and a constructed poem. So it's called God's Bounty as Data Sets on Firearms Use. And so that's exactly what the list is, a list of. You can go out and find, use your search engine, and you can find any of these data sets. So this is just the titles of data sets. God's Bounty as Data Sets on Firearms Use. National Violent Death Reporting System. General Social Survey. National Traumatic Occupational Fatality Surveillance System. International Classification of External Causes of Injury. Uniform Crime Reporting Program, National Incident-Based Reporting System. Uniform Crime Reporting Program, Monthly Return of Offenses Known to Police. Census of Manufacturers. Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System. Producer Price Index. National Census of Fatal Occupation Injuries. National Electronic Injury Surveillance System All Injury Program. National Hospital Ambulatory Medical Care Survey. National Vital Statistics System Final Mortality Data. Firearm Inquiry Statistics. National Mortality Followback Survey. Law enforcement officers killed and assaulted. BATF firearms trace data. National Study of Private Ownership of Firearms in the U.S. National Vital Statistics System current mortality sample. Data elements for emergency department systems. Survey of gun owners in the U.S. Survey of state procedures related to firearm sales. Survey of occupational injuries and illnesses. Annual Firearms Manufacturing and Exportation Report. Census of State and Federal Correctional Facilities. Uniform Crime Reporting Program, Supplemental Homicide Reports. Arrestee Drug Abuse Monitoring, Gun Addendum. Monitoring the Future. National Crime Victimization Survey. Youth Crime Gun Interdiction Initiative. Federal Justice Statistics Program. Federal Firearms Licensee List. National Violence Against Women Survey.
Thank you, Harvey. How was the book received? Have you, do you know how the book was received, read over the last few years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a sense that this book might have a broader reach than a normal poetry collection. You know, we all know that the audience for poetry is small in this country, but I thought that this might have a just broader reach, that it might find an audience that wouldn't normally engage a book of poems, but that might engage this book. And that seems not to have played out, or I haven't observed it. The book has not, you know, sold especially better than my other books. It hasn't gotten much wider review. It got a lovely review on NPR, but was not widely reviewed. You know, has not sold or sort of entered into public discussion in ways outside of what's normal for me, which is, you know, mostly silence. So that it hasn't generated sort of what I thought it might in terms of public discussion. You know, which of course I've been disappointed in, obviously out of self-interested, you know, I wish I was rich and famous, but because because the book tries to talk about a phenomenon that I understand as being the underneath the surface phenomena that we're experiencing. So my sense is that for example, the change in presidency from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, yes, it's major in a lot of ways, and it'll influence public discourse, and, you know, sort of what do we hear coming out of the office of the president will be very, very different for the next 4 years. But my concern is there's something underneath all of this. You know, Donald Trump as president of the United States is a possibility because there's something much bigger than that. You know, if he wasn't put into office, somebody was going to be. There's an anger that precedes Donald Trump's anger and makes it possible. You know, there's something going on that allows, when he famously said, you know, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue or however it went, and essentially suffer no repercussions for it. There's something that makes that true. And it's not, the something that makes that true didn't get fixed just by pulling Donald Trump out of office and putting Joe Biden in. We've still got that thing is still present in the United States. And that thing is what we've got to fix if we want to live together with less harm to one another, if we want to have a form of government that we all recognize as a democracy, if we want to have a form of government that you know, really fulfills the promise of liberty and justice for all, if we want to have that, we got to fix this problem. It's substituting a new president doesn't fix this problem. And that's what I wanted this to try to look at and try to understand and come to grips with.
Harvey, I think this is a book ahead of its time. This is what I think happened, and maybe now it's its time. Maybe now we're ready to really look at this dark phenomenon And I really thank you for bringing it to the light, to the surface, and writing about it with so much care. And I know that this book took years of your life to write,
Right.
to examine, to process. And I thank you for this service.
Thank you.
This is
Thank
a
you.
remarkable book.
Yeah. Thank you so very much. Yeah.